Okay, everybody, welcome to another session with Macquarie University and the New South Wales Federation of Community Language Schools. I'm Alex de Prinze, the Education Officer for the Federation of Community Language Schools. And this evening, it's our second last session, and it's with Dr. Wes Robertson. It sounds like a really interesting topic. I'll let him discuss with you what it's about. We will just a bit more housekeeping for those of you who have just joined. Please, let's keep our microphones off for now. Wes will discuss how we will have some questions. There will be a video recording, as you know, so switch off your cameras if you don't want to be videoed. And we will have the session posted on our YouTube channel and made available to you all with the slides in the YouTube film or video. Apart from that, if we can just get, yes, your socks away from there, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Over to you, Wes.
Hello, everyone. Very, very nice to be here. Thank you very much for making the time to come. So my name is Wes Robertson, and today I'm going to be talking about creativity, play, and non-standard language use in community language learning. First, I'd just like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, as I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Wadamadigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land ever since the tree time. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So before we start, as mentioned, it'd be great if you could mute your microphones. This session, being recorded. We will have 2 breakout rooms this session, which will not be recorded. And if you have a question, raise your hand, or preferably write the question in the chat. I have the chat open and I'll be monitoring it briefly. Generally speaking, it would be a bit harder to see the raise of hands, but might take time for volunteers. And beyond that, when speaking, please do unmute yourself so that we can hear you. But should be pretty easy. If you have kind of burning questions while I'm talking, pop them in chat and I'll try to get to them when I can. So just a bit about me before we begin. As you might have already been able to tell, I am not Australian. I came here to Australia in 2012, and I got my master's from Monash University in 2013. I came here to begin my master's, and my PhD from Monash University still in 2016. I'm currently a senior lecturer at Macquarie University in Japanese studies, and my research focuses on Japanese writing and sociolinguistics, subcultural language use, and translation. So actually, I do not study teaching, unlike some of the people that you have seen present in the prior weeks. However, I am very, of course, active in teaching. Teaching is a large part of what I do, and it's something that I'm very, very, of course, interested in and passionate about. I think that language teaching is fantastic and a delight. As you can probably guess, though, as someone that works in Japanese studies, my language teaching is all in Japanese. So I'm going to try to have many practical examples throughout this presentation, but they're going to be examples in Japanese. There'll be translations, I'll explain, but if you notice a bias towards examples of Japanese language learning, please forgive me for that. So this presentation is going to be broken down into 3 sections. And the first is talking about games and language learning, where I'll be discussing the value of games in classrooms, some tips for designing activities, and how we can use these to turn language learners into language users. For the second part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about non-standard language use, and trying to argue that we need to rethink correctness, rethink concepts of expertise, and explore language evolution in the classroom whenever possible. And then finally, just very, very briefly, a quick little wrap up, I'll be tying these 2 themes together to talk about the value of play. Some of the earlier presentations you've heard, talked about kind of positivity in the classroom, and that all kind of links together here, looking at how both of these first 2 topics link to ultimately be talking about how language learning can be a source of fun, and through becoming a source of fun, can serve as a vehicle for helping us realize that language can be something that allows us to access kind of our individual interests and develop our own passions, which exist outside of a classroom setting. So to begin, I want to talk about games and language learning, and this is going to be pretty practical, I think. I'm mainly going to be talking about things that kind of I've done, what I've learned about as somebody that really enjoys using games and playing games in kind of their own personal life. So beginning with kind of the general topic here of what kind of games work best in a language classroom. I'll be breaking this down into 3 categories, which are simple ones, supportive ones, and enjoyable ones. And within these categories, I want to talk about how lower complexity is going to yield higher results for you. The idea that simple rules can allow for focusing on language, which is, of course, our goal, right? Our goal is not just to play games. It's a bonus. Our goal is not just to have fun. Our goal is to teach language. So looking at how simplicity allows us to achieve that goal. And also, again, allowing language production to be something which is kind of silly or fun, and not looking at that as a bad thing, but looking at that as a positive. In supportive, I'll be talking about how this can help us build or scaffold developing knowledge, the need to focus on activities that are collaborative rather than competitive, and how the supportive element of a good activity or game can help reduce stress and burdens. And then finally, of course, we want any activity we do to be enjoyable, in that it can help allow students to create communities, explore new ways to learn language, and build motivation for quote unquote harder tasks. So let's start here with simple, with the first point that lower complexity yields higher results. I don't know how many of you are using games and activities in your classroom. I imagine most of you to some extent, but to those who are a bit nervous or to those who personally don't play that many games, I wanted to start with this point because I don't want anyone to be scared. I personally really like complicated games in my life when I'm, hanging out with friends or spending time not teaching, just kind of having fun. It's something that appeals to me. But this is not what we want in the classroom. And if you're not someone that plays a lot of games, if you're not someone, don't think I mean that you have to like design a video game or something like that. If you're not someone that's, keeping up with the games your students are playing outside of class, if you don't even play, simple or classic games, checkers, chess, etc., and you're very much in life, that's fine, because we don't want these things to be difficult. The lower the complexity of your activity, the higher the result you're going to get, because you'll be spending less time dealing with the fact that you have to explain the game. When students come to your language classroom, they are, of course, already busy using their minds to grasp the grammar, the point, the concept, the culture that you are introducing. So having fun, using these games to have fun, is important. It's the third point that I raised earlier, but it's a side benefit. We do want to, of course, ensure that any time we spend in the classroom is helping secure language knowledge. So simple, familiar games are good and are still fun for adults. I first started using games when I was teaching in middle school and elementary schools in Japan, long time ago. And I was initially kind of nervous when I came to teach at a university for the first time, because a lot of the activities I had, I knew that, elementary school students like them, middle school students like them, but would they be successful? Would they work with older students? And the answer has always been yes. In fact, some students really, really like being reminded of games they played a long time ago. The simplicity can actually be a draw. In most cases, then, the less knowledge a student needs to acquire to play the game, the better. If you have to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes explaining how the game works, that's probably not one that you want to do within the classroom. So here's an example of one of the simplest games, and I hope my use of the term here isn't controversial in this context, but that I've ever done, which is just a random number generator. When I teach introductory Japanese, we have to learn how to count. And so one of the activities I do is give students access to a random number generator, easily found online, can access through phones. You don't need to have slides or anything like that, just a link. Or of course you can roll dice, etc., if you don't have any technology available, and they get the number and try to say it. Is this a complex game? No. Is it a fun game? For about 5 minutes. I wouldn't do it for a half hour, but it takes about 2 seconds to explain. Students get right in there. And when you compare it to, say, the traditional option, which is here are a bunch of numbers I've prepared, read them, it is more exciting because it puts students in the place where they are actively doing something. And Sometimes the results can be surprising. It moves them from just, okay, here's what the teacher has prepared to, okay, I am actually making the numbers that I'll use. So again, very, very, very simple, about as simple as you can get, but it does still create an activity which puts students in the smallest amount of control and lets the teacher kind of step back and the students work together. Here's a more complex version of this activity. This has a random time generator and some basic questions. One student will ask the question and the other student answers with the time. Now, this is again, quite simple. And it mirrors, of course, something that people often already do, right? We learn how to ask people when. So this is obviously for the grammar point very, very early on of when do you do something? You know, what time do you do something? Instead of just saying, okay, free for all, ask these kinds of questions to each other. Or here's an example of questions. There's a random set of questions on flashcards and random times. And not only does it give students a bit of pressure relief, which I'll talk about later, because they don't have to think up questions. Some examples of the grammar point are provided to them. It also prevents them from just, defaulting to the easiest answer. I want them to practice minutes, so I give them random times with minutes. And again, puts them in a bit of control. They're pushing the buttons, they're focusing, they're talking amongst each other, etc. Another simple one is entire sentence construction. This is an activity that I use quite often where within a grammar point, I'll provide some of the information students need, and they will combine it randomly based on the random output they get to create a sentence. So in this case, if we're learning verbs and adverbs like always, never, etc., one student gets one student gets the other, they put them together. Sometimes the combinations are a bit silly, but they're working together. It's very simple. And I can explain this within 30, 40 seconds without any kind of issue. This is far simpler than any kind of game that you play competitively, certainly. It's so simple that some people might not assume it would be considered, a game. But it is, in that there's a bit of randomness, there's a bit of a challenge, and it's putting students into the place where they are kind of directing things. So when I say that lower complexity yields higher results, I mean this level of simplicity will go a long way in your classrooms. Indeed, even something as simple if you want students that stand up, walk around, like using a kind of guided map where the students ask each other questions and move along a piece of paper, providing that for them can be more exciting than just putting those questions up on a screen and saying, okay, ask each other these questions, because it gives that students a bit of control and again, puts them in a situation where they feel like they are doing an activity rather than just kind of modeling a dialogue. And all of this is important, of course, because of the the other benefits of games that I'll be talking about as we go forward. You also then have the importance that a simple rule, this use of simple rules, simple activities, not only makes our burden easier, it allows students to focus on language. I'm going to encourage you all to learn from my mistakes in that you don't want to be spending time during the game or activity having students try to remember or explain to each other how the game or activity works. As mentioned, I personally really like more complex activities in my own life. So when I came to the university setting for the first time, my initial idea was, okay, these students are a bit older, compared to middle school students, etc. They therefore want or are used to more complex activities, and I tried some of them out. And it was actually never something that went well. Even if everyone got what I was trying to do, remembering how to play the game became the focus rather than the language point we were trying to remember. And all the time that was spent with me explaining what to do took away from time to practice the language form. So make sure that the way that language is being used in the game is clear, simple, and controlled. If students need to spend time during the game processing what the game itself is, it's going to make it so that the focus, the language use, is not primary. So while designing a game, when you have an idea, I would encourage you to think about ways to reduce both the explanation time and the setup time. And whenever possible, look for open online resources. There are a lot of ways that you can just get things ready on the internet or even download, and think about the possibility of, can they play the game at home? Can they play the game alone? If you have an activity that is available online, something that can be done through phones or something that is easy to print off, it can be something that students do not only in the classroom, but also outside as practice. And indeed, something that they can explain to other people that they learn the language with, perhaps their parents, et cetera, to get them involved, right? To give them another way to practice, which is not just simply speaking. But if they really enjoy the game, it's great if it's something that they can produce on their own, use on their own, or do on their own outside of the classroom. So to give an example of this kind of simplicity, when I was teaching in middle schools, had a game I developed for teaching numbers and things like please, where students would get fake currency and they'd buy objects from each other. And one person would be the shopkeeper. And it worked. It was okay. Especially because those classes were a bit more about having fun than language. And again, they were for younger students, but it required a lot of preparation. I had to buy all the props. I had to explain what was going on. I had to single out students that that were a bit more proficient so that they could take the shopkeeper role. And we tried this the first year I came to university to teach prices, and just it took forever. There were all the setup time, all the explanations, and then the cleanup time for what's really a minor thing, right? Just doing basic math, using numbers, and saying please. So we thought about, okay, how can we simplify it? Our goal is to teach basic counting, to teach, basic shopping etiquette within the target culture. How can we make it so that all this stuff we prepared can be reduced in a way that lets us focus on these goals? And the ending outcome is simply a slide with some objects and prices on them. And the students list what they want to buy. The other person does the math and says the number, and that's it. In theory, this is maybe not as fun, right? You're not handling currency and stuff, et cetera. But in reality, it's actually a better activity. It starts off a little slow. It's very, very simple. But the students, once they get comfortable with it, they start to increase the difficulty. We let students play this for a few minutes. That's all that's required. Again, it's not a super exciting activity, but they do have fun with it. And as they get along, they start to think, okay, now it's my turn. I'm going to be a little mean and I'll say 3 items, right? And the next person says, okay, well, I'm going to get them back and I'm going to say 4 items. And they naturally compete against each other a little bit in this way. And the activity gets more and more difficult, which develops their language abilities more and more and more as they get to higher and higher numbers. And we're done with the entire thing within a very, very short period of time and can kind of move on. So this simplification has been extremely effective and actually allowed us to focus more on the target language with less preparation on our end, and ultimately a pretty similar level of enjoyability with no issue of explanation, no issue of singling out students for a complex role, etc. Another simple way to make the language rules easy is to take a game that students already know how to play and make it a language game. In my classes, one of the things that we use often is just memory games where students flip over cards and try to find the pairs. In this case, using a counter and an object. We can just start the class by saying, hey, everyone here knows how to play the memory card game, right? And everyone goes, yep. And they're like, okay, go online and try it out. So using a game that students already know, but making it language focused, really, really easy, really simple way to reduce the complexity to make sure that the focus is on the language, not memorizing the rules for a game. Another thing you can do is to take an activity that is maybe a little more complex, but that you find your students like a lot. If you have a game that's very, very successful, multiple games based on that game reduce the complexity because every time they play the game, they're now familiar with the rules, right? The first explanation might take a little bit, but the second takes less, the third takes less. And by the end, you're like, hey, this game you all like, we're doing it now with this grammar pattern. Let's try that out. This here, for instance, is an example of a kind of guess who game that we use to practice good at and bad at. So when we first introduced this grammar point, the first iteration we just said, okay, turn to the person next to you and ask them, what are you good at? Just as a little bit of practice. And, it was actually really hard. Students froze. Like you think, what are you good at? Oh, I'm good at this. Easy, done, easy, simple. But it wasn't. Some of them didn't want to brag. Some of them didn't know the specific word for their talent and froze. They didn't want to lie. Others were just a little embarrassed and they stopped. Like the you think like you don't need practice for this grammar point. It's really simple. I am good at soccer, done. But students weren't comfortable. They weren't ready for it. So we decided to remove all that pressure and make an activity where they choose one of these 6 people, and each person has three activities listed next to them that they are good at. If you choose a person, then you are bad at everything that isn't listed. You only have 3 talents. And then through process of elimination, they try to figure out who their partner had chosen. So again, it's all in Japanese, I apologize, but the first guy in the top left is good at piano, karaoke, and cooking. So if your partner says, are you good at cooking? You would say yes, if you chose him. If they say, are you good at soccer? You would say no. And through that, they figure out who the person is. Now, that took a few minutes for me to explain to you, not as short as the other ones. So that's kind of a bummer, right? We don't want to spend a lot of time explaining it, but it's not super complicated. I can explain it in a few minutes, and students do understand this within a few minutes. They have played games similar to this when they were kids. And then once I've explained it, we can then use it in a different context. Here, this is for the grammar point, I can. Same general idea, pick a person. Once you pick that person, you are able to do 3 things and nothing else. So if you pick this top person, you can use chopsticks, cook, and play soccer. And through this process of elimination, you try to figure out who your partner picked. By the time students encounter this activity, we've done a few of these. So I'm just like, hey, you remember this activity? You've all enjoyed it. Because of that, we're doing it again. And the explanation time goes down and down and down. So if you do take the risk to do something a little more complicated and students like it, don't hesitate to bring it back. They're not going to be like, oh, it's this again. They like the activity. So don't feel like you have to make every single one of them unique and different. You can reuse what's worked in a new context, and students will actually latch onto that because like, oh, it's the thing I know, but now I'm learning a new grammar point through the practice. And indeed, if you just search for something like Learning Game Creator or free clip art, there's a lot of options that can allow you to really make, if you have access to a PowerPoint, a slide that can be used for the game, or of course a printout, etc., if that's your option. I should make it very clear that all of the clip art I'm using here comes from the wonderful website Irastoya, which does have a rudimentary English search. It is Japanese focused, but it does have some English available. And this kind of fantastic free stuff can make things that look pretty good for just a little bit of time. And again, we don't want to have too high of a financial investment buying props and things like that can be extremely expensive and result in a game that's overly complicated, making it so we don't even know if the money was used well. The other goal of this, the other benefit of these games, is that it can make producing language something that is very, very silly or very, very fun. A game does not have to be a game in the traditional sense of having strict rules, winners, losers, game pieces, etc. Sorry, to respond to chat, it is Irastoya, which I've just typed there. Oftentimes, the benefit of a game is that it frees learners from the pressure of producing original phrasing while they're still building confidence. As I mentioned, learners can be sometimes nervous, even with very, very simple patterns, be it that they don't want to share their personal background or they're just, freezing when they're put on the spot. So by removing the pressure, by giving them what they're going to say or guiding them to what they're going to say, we can make them more, ready to speak in the future. And so don't hesitate to be silly or even ridiculous, as laughter and fun can be a reason why something sticks in your brain forever. We don't want to have everything be silly, but if you are comfortable having a few jokes, having a few laughs, that can put a grammar point into your brain. I remember when I was learning Japanese, I had very, very low motivation one week, and I had an assignment to write a bunch of example sentences around the grammar points I was working on. And so it's not a little bit weird, but I'm actually a big fan of horror. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to make all of these example sentences focused around zombies. Is that weird? Yeah, a little bit. Is it silly? Yes. But I had fun doing it. My teacher wasn't impressed, but I did have fun doing it. It was grammatically correct. And because of that, some of those grammar patterns are stuck in my brain forever. And I've seen this happen with students as well. We had students once this semester actually come up with a random person that they were basing all their example sentences around. And it not only encouraged them to think, okay, what's this person going to do today? But they came up with these sentences that were stuck in their brain and had them, memorize the grammar point. To give an example of this in an activity, a game that I've used, there's a grammar point that I teach early on of just how to say, no, I am not a something. So to do this grammar point, again, to reduce the burden from students so they don't have to ask each other, okay, are you this? Yes, I am. Oh, okay, that's not going to work. I created 20 sentences that I think that they're all going to answer no to. So this first one, are you a teacher? Some students might answer yes, but most of them will say no. And it's a pretty normal question, right? They try this out. It's a normal question. It's a question you might ask someone in real life. The second question, though, is, do you eat koala? Is that a question they would ever ask in real life? No. Do they laugh when they see it? Yes. And does that help them memorize the way to say, do you verb? No, I don't verb. Absolutely. It builds kind of joy and a bit of giggling in the classroom and has them kind of excited to move along. The next few are pretty serious, but every once in a while there's one that is, implausible for a number of reasons, and also fits within, of course, the concept of the game, which is getting them to practice the no, not something, no, I don't something form. Likewise, this is another pretty simple activity that we use a lot, where students get 3 parts of a sentence and they then work together in a group to create a sentence using it. This one randomly gives them a location, an activity, and then a movement verb like go, didn't go, won't go, did not, did go, etc. And they combine them into a sentence together. Because these are all randomized, they can get kind of silly. A lot of them are okay. I didn't go to that apartment to make ramen. That's not that funny. But because there are all these options, some of them do end up kind of weird. And that's actually a benefit, right? We haven't adjusted the game to make sure every single sentence is something they would actually say. In fact, the fact that some of them are silly makes the game kind of fun. It's what makes them laugh. It's what makes them excited to it. And importantly, it's what makes them want to go back to it on their own time and try again. So for instance, I didn't come to the zoo to break or destroy a car is a possible sentence you can get. It's a bit weird. They would never say that in real life, but it practices the grammar point. It uses the past tense, which is something we're focusing on. And in this week, the verb for break or destroy is one that's in our vocab list. So it's not just silly. It is actually silly in a way that hits all of the goals of the activity, and therefore, does improve their language ability overall. Apologies, the lights are automatic. I'm going to be a bit dark as I continue talking. So this then brings us to the point that games need to be supportive in that they're going to help build or scaffold our knowledge. When you introduce a grammar point or piece of knowledge and then move directly to open practice, just say, hey, here's the grammar point, use it in a sentence. That, of course, isn't bad. That's the eventual goal of what we're doing, but it can be terrifying and in ways that we as language teachers sometimes aren't aware of, because we can do it. Say again, going back to the can you play soccer, or what are you good at question. To me, that's a really simple question, but to students it can be a little bit terrifying. So when we create a bit of space here so that we introduce the grammar point or knowledge explicitly, and then have a game focused on the grammar pattern to build confidence with the pattern itself before moving to this kind of open practice, that can assist students in avoiding this kind of fear. Scaffolding, as we call it in academia, building, right? Piece by piece, lifting them up like we're building a building rather than kind of jumping to the end product. Indeed, if you have the time, and that is, of course, a constant question, right? How much time do we have? How much resources do we have? But if we have the time, going from the introduction to a simple game to a more structured practice where they work within a model dialogue to then open practice can build to a really, really confident student, with game being, a key part of that process. And indeed, you can also go from a simple game to a game which is more complex in terms of the grammar it expects. Although again, we do want to keep those rules as simple as possible. Another key thing to think about is, are your games collaborative or competitive? Because a traditional perspective on games is one that involves a winner and a loser, or more likely winners and losers, and there's always going to be more losers than winners. And that is something which is good to avoid in a classroom-based or an educational game whenever possible, because our goal isn't to have winners and losers, it's to have everyone have a good time and increase their language abilities. Even in a very, very low stakes setting where our goal is to learn language rather than to win. When we play a game in class, our students, of course, know that the point of the game is not actually to win, it's to learn and use the language. Nevertheless, losing feels bad. It just does, always. And it can demotivate students. And that's the last thing we want to do. If our games, if our activities, if what we're doing in class is demotivating, that's never, obviously, never a good thing. So whenever possible, have your games designed in a way where groups can work together to complete the game, or have groups work as a class where they compete not to win or to lose, but to produce something that kind of everyone finds fun and enjoyable, leading to a place where if one group has a good idea, everyone benefits from it, rather than just the group that came up with a good idea being awarded while all the other groups kind of feel like they're not as good. Because there will be students who are better or worse, and that's fine. And students who go out of their way to learn more should be encouraged, but not in a way that makes other students feel bad for not achieving that kind of level. So let me tell you an example of something that I did that failed because I came with a traditional perspective, looking at kind of winners and losers, etc. So the basic idea I had was that I wanted them to practice the phrases, please do this, and then please don't do this, which in Japanese are two different grammar points we teach very, very close to each other. So what I would also wanted, though, is for students to get skills using dictionaries. So rather than just using the vocab that we taught in the textbook, I wanted them to use dictionaries to find new vocab and create clever original sentences using this vocab in the grammar point. So they developed the grammar point, they thought about certain locations in Japan and what's appropriate and inappropriate there. And they also learned a bit about the online tools that they need to succeed as language users and language learners, such as, online dictionaries, of course. So my first design of this was that students would be put into groups and they would come up with original ideas using dictionaries, etc. But one student would be a judge. And the judge would sit there and do nothing. And you can see that this is already a flawed activity, telling someone to do nothing for 2 minutes. But they would do nothing until all the students have their sentences. And then the students would say the sentence and translate it because it used words from a dictionary, right? So they had to translate it. And then the winner would be picked by the judge as having the most interesting sentences. And then they would become the judge and we would do it again. Now, this is already complicated. You're already probably bored and your eyes are glazing over because this activity is just too difficult to explain. In addition to it, though, it requires one student to be an authority figure, which is arbitrary. Like, what makes a sentence good? What makes a sentence the funniest? What makes a sentence the most creative? These aren't things that we really, I felt comfortable judging. And then also it puts all the students against each other. And if one student is really talented, they'll end up being the judge over and over and over again, which can make other students feel bad because they are trying really hard to come up with an original sentence. It's not their fault that someone arbitrarily said it's not the funniest or the most interesting. So it wasn't good. It was too complicated and too competitive. It put everyone in the group against each other. So the second draft, okay, the students work together in groups to come up with one please and one please don't sentence as a group. So they're all working together. The teacher is then the judge, and the students will say their sentences, translate them for the class, and the teacher will pick the most interesting one, and the winning group gets a prize at the end. Now, that's better. I explained it to you within a minute, so that's okay. The groups are working together, so weaker students and stronger students can support each other and learn from each other, which is good. But ultimately, we still have the teacher being a judge, which again, if a group is very, very dominant, can demotivate the other groups. Like, why am I even practicing this grammar point if I'm just going to lose? You can be like, well, losing isn't the point of the activity. Winning is not the point of the activity. It's the grammar point, right? But the students think things like that. I'm just going to lose, so why bother? And that's not what we really, really want. And again, even as teachers, what's the most interesting? What's the funniest? What's the most creative? That's sort of arbitrary. So we found out that this didn't work that well either. So our third draft, the students work together in groups and come up with original ideas, and then they present them to the class. So for instance, with the hot spring, please do and please don't at the hot spring. The teacher then just says, that's a great example. And they would write it on the board and break it down for the rest of the class. And that's it. The goal is simply to have fun, to be creative. Who's the most creative? Who knows? It doesn't matter. Our goal isn't to be the most creative. It's to learn how to use a dictionary, have a little bit of fun. And students found quite quickly that if they put a little time into it, if they thought about it, then the class would laugh, and that could be the reward in and of itself, right? The competition comes naturally from the classroom enjoying the activity and thinking, oh, everyone laughed at that one. How can we make everyone laugh? Rather than the teacher saying, I'm going to choose the one that's the funniest. So by simplifying this activity, by turning it into collaborative, and by eventually making it so there's no explicit winners, and turning every single student example into something that we put up on the board, talk about it. If there's a mistake, mention it and be like, look, this is something that we need to pay attention to, but turning it into a learning resource, and even thanking the students, say like, thanks for making that mistake. It's very, very common. It gives us a great chance to talk about it, turns the entire activity into something that was positive, and again, can be explained in 30 seconds and achieves all the goals for the activity as well. And this all, of course, builds to the fact that we want our games to reduce stress and burdens. So a strong game or activity will create a break where the students and teachers can have fun in a productive way. It'll also prepare students, again, for a harder activity, which requires free language use by building confidence and building excitement about the grammar pattern, building excitement about their own abilities. And then also, it can be a way for developing skills useful to language learning, be it collaboration, be it the math, as mentioned earlier, to buy something, be it translation software, which is a tool, and useful to understand technology, or even just developing their creativity. Because as you all know, being creative is a key part of using language, right? We all want to express ourselves as unique individuals. So becoming creative is a great outcome for a game to have, developing that kind of creativity in a new place. So filling in these blanks isn't just useful for scaffolding as well. By using games, by using activities, you can help students become comfortable with themselves, with the activity, with the language, because some students may not want to or be able to speak about certain topics. Providing them with gaps to fill in or characters to play can avoid these issues. Again, talking about talents, I mentioned earlier, something that's not always comfortable. I'm sure all of you know that, activities which just assume tell us about your parents usually aren't great activities, because that can be something that some people aren't comfortable. Tell us about your family, tell us about this. Some people aren't comfortable talking about that, and putting them in an uncomfortable place is not going to help them be a good language learner. Whereas saying, okay, look, here's the family that I've designed. Can you describe it? Or pick a character, pick their family. These are their family members, describe them, right? Taking that burden away of thinking about what's real, thinking about what they're going to have to say, how to say it politely, how to frame it in a way that they're comfortable with, and making it a game or activity can reduce that burden and avoid those kind of situations that we always want to avoid. Also, games can help people learn more about a language, because students can gravitate towards saying things or trying to say things in just a quote unquote fluent manner, as in their L1 or L1s, which can cause decision paralysis. One thing that I always focus on in my beginner courses is that it's okay not to sound like a native speaker yet. It's okay not to sound as skilled in the language as in English or whatever other languages they speak, because we're at this beginner level. The thing we want to do is think about, how can I express myself given the limits of my ability? How can I work with what I know rather than try to translate everything I want to say? And so limiting options can actually be freeing, showing simpler ways of saying what is quote unquote the same thing. So This, of course, brings us then to the final point of enjoyable, that we want to make sure our games are, and this sounds obvious, but fun, in allowing students to create communities. Another reason that we want to avoid this traditional 1 versus 1 kind of fighting kind of thing, or winners versus losers in the style of games that we do, is that working together creates a sense of community and helps students learn how they can problem solve together. And language is, of course, something used in communities. You're all community language teachers, right? So I talked earlier about the memory game activity that I introduced as a very, very simple one that students already know. Now, we do allow students that want to make this competitive to do so, right? Okay, I flipped it over, they didn't match, it's now your turn. But it's been just as good to have students in their groups do it all together and work as a group to memorize where all the various objects are. And when they finish, instead of saying, okay, try again and see who wins this time, say, can you beat the time? Can you do it even faster? And therefore they work together in a way that, very early on, counting is quite an early thing that we do, numbers, brings them together, gets them to know each other, and gets them working together in a way that benefits them as they continue to learn other forms. Likewise, it allows us to explore new ways to use a language. When we learn languages as a child, it's easiest for us to immediately find uses for new language forms, right? You're just, hey, I heard a word, I'm going to use it to my parents. When you're learning a language in a place where the language is often spoken, it's really easy to find new uses. When I lived in Japan, I learned a new vocab word. I could go out and test it out on somebody in real life within a few minutes. That can be a bit trickier in the Australian context. So we can't forget that it isn't this simple for older learners, even if, and by older, I just mean not a child. Even if they understand the form and are aware of the translation, they may not immediately grasp the entirety of how to use it. So games and activities can be designed to introduce new ways of using a form that students may not have realized or may not be comfortable attempting. Again, a Japanese example, I apologize, it's the language that I know. This is an activity I use for teaching the form, how do you do activity? If you've been following me, you probably go, oh, hey, that's the game where you choose the person you are and then answer based on that. Yep, there you go. See, already explained. You're familiar with the game, we're good to go. In this case, the person you choose does 3 activities and the pictures show how. So our first guy in the work overalls eats ramen with his hand, goes to, again, a bit silly, going to work by bike, and he watches movies on his tablet. Now, in Japanese, these all use 1 grammar point to say. So in English, though, it's not, right? By hand, with chopsticks, with a fork and spoon, bike to work, take the train, drive, use a tablet, watch on my PC or watch on my phone. All of these phrasings are distinct in English, but in Japanese, we're just going to use de. So by introducing this grammar point and then moving to this game, I also partially, my goal is in part to say, here are a bunch of English phrases that can all use this. I do, of course, say de means by means of, right? But we don't say like via hand. Say, how are you going to eat that? Via hand. Can you? Yeah, but we don't speak like that, right? So people don't, it doesn't come to mind. How are you going to go to work? Oh, via bike. No, you could say that, but it's not really the day-to-day English, right? So by taking these various forms and including them all in the game and having students realize, oh, all these things are de, it introduces the breadth, the width that this form actually has in a way that builds kind of that extra knowledge before we go into more open-ended practice. So to kind of wrap all this up, the ultimate goal of a game should not just be to play a game or to leave students going, oh, that was fun, but rather to make them feel, oh, okay, I can absolutely use this form. Scaffolding here is done not just to develop the skills needed for the hardest tasks, but the very desire in our students to attempt them. And when developing multiple activities, think of how you can gradually increase the difficulty / freedom. As with each successful iteration, students will harden their fundamentals while developing these kind of new skills. As a result, we turn from someone who is scared to somebody who both thinks that they can do this and they want to do this, which leads us to, of course, our highly motivated and passionate language learner, which is the kind of goal that we're going for, right? So I want to just kind of take a quick break here and wrap some of these ideas up by putting you into breakout rooms. I'm looking at the time, and it's going to be a little short, just about maybe 5 or 6 minutes, but see if you can talk about 2 topics with the people that you're with. And that is just one, can you think of a game or activity you used in your classroom and it worked really well? Why did it work well? And why are you going to come back to it? And secondly, what is a game or activity that didn't work? And maybe that you now have an idea of how to try again. So if you could share something you did that went well and something that you might want to try to improve in the breakout rooms, that would be great. And then we'll all come back and move to the second part of this presentation.
Here we go.
All right. Yeah, I heard some really interesting ideas. I even heard someone bring up having students design games, which I never thought of. And I think that's a fantastic idea, especially if they're, a little bit more into games than we are. Having their ideas is something that maybe I'll have to try that out, see, look for group ideas. So the second thing I want to talk about is non-standard language in language learning. So this is related, which I'll wrap up at the end, but is kind of a bit of a change in topic. So I want to start by showing you this quote. This is from the language log blog of UPenn, and they noted a book written by a Simon Heffer, which talks about correct English. And the tag for the book is a notification that the sentence at the bottom of this slide here is ungrammatical, and the book can tell you why. So the sentence is, the Prime Minister has warned that spending cuts are necessary. Just in chat, does anyone know, can anyone identify the error in this sentence? And I'm going to actually, error with air quotes. There's a supposed error. I couldn't.
It says pending cuts. So it should be singular. Should be is necessary?
No, well, perhaps, but that's not the no, that should be removed. That's not the argument either. A lot of ideas, right? It's the fact that we don't immediately know. Issue with the tenses, not according to the book. According to the book, so I'll just, the answer is that you can't use warned this way. Now, if all of you are like, what? I'm fine with the use of warned. Well, that's kind of the point I'm going to be making here. If we say something is wrong, but it sounds right to everyone, is it wrong? And I would say no. So here's the issue. Traditionally, warn is a transitive verb, so it requires a direct object, and that you have to warn someone. So you warn him, you warn a careless driver, warn her employees, warn a person. You have to have an individual after warn, right? The dictionary says warn is a transitive verb, so you have to say the Prime Minister warned the public. Except you don't, because I'm hiding the second half of this dictionary where it clearly notes that warn is also used without direct objects. So this guide is telling something that maybe at one point was true. Maybe if you go back long enough, no one ever used warn without a direct object. But now we do. And the dictionary isn't bad because it notes both uses. It's good because people use both uses. No one in the chat caught this quote unquote error. So that means that we don't think it's an error. We're fine using it. Who is this person to tell us it's an error if we're acceptable, if we think it's acceptable? And if we use it, if it's something that people use, and it is, indeed, Google gives me 5 million results for has warned that with no direct object. If 5 million Google hits exist, then a dictionary that doesn't include this intransitive use, the use without a direct object, then that's a bad dictionary because a language learner can't learn what they need to from that dictionary. So language education has long been obsessed with what is natural or correct. And there's an obvious reason for this. We want to learn to speak quote unquote correctly. If you say something and no one understands you, that's not good. That's not the goal. Students have expectations, tests have expectations. If we teach them to speak in a way that no one understands, that's clearly not what we want to do. But there's a difference between an error of grammar and a difference in grammar. And there are lots of differences out there. Indeed, I would disagree with most of you on how to spell the word color, assuming you follow the Australian system. Does that mean one of us is correct? Not necessarily. There's a difference. And that difference is in part linked to issues of culture. And cultures can be nationwide, they can be subcultural, etc. So overlooking language in use for language in theory is ultimately harmful in that it doesn't give students an accurate picture of what they're going to encounter. So to give an example from English, which may be a little controversial, there's a lot of issues going around, people complaining about the use of the word literally to mean something that is not literal. And people will say, go to the dictionary. If you go to the dictionary, you will see that literally means in a literal sense or manner, or using the real or original meaning of the word or phrase. And indeed, here are two examples from the dictionary. And as you can see, literally is defined as real, exact, etc. Except it's not. As you probably already guessed, I'm once again hiding part of what the dictionary says because they both recognize that. Now, there's an informal note that's useful. That's good knowledge, that's good information, but it's used for emphasis, in effect, virtually. And this doesn't make these bad dictionaries. This makes these very, very good dictionaries, because a good dictionary lets us know how language is being used. Now, we may not like the way the language is being used, but it is being used in that way. And so if you're a language learner, you need to know about those uses. Because if someone says, she laughed so hard, she literally died, and your response is, I am sorry for your loss, there's a communicative breakdown. Yes, okay, the use of literally is figurative, it's for emphasis, it's not the first definition in the dictionary, but a competent language learner would respond with, ahaha, that's hilarious. So by ignoring language in use for language in theory, we actually do a disservice to our language learners because we aren't giving them the tools they need to access what is really happening, the things that people are actually saying. And that's the goal, right? To help people speak. So if students are learning language to interact with communities, they will need these sociolinguists. They'll need these languages of these communities. If people use language online, for instance, they'll need to know what some of the online languages, because they want to make friends with these people they met on the internet, etc. People use language to join subcultures. Finding people of your same interest that speak the language is a good reason, a good motivation for getting really passionate about it and developing your knowledge. And while it's important for people to learn the difference between formal and casual, what you'll see and what you should use if you're writing an essay or reading an essay versus what's okay at a bar, that knowledge, giving them that knowledge is something I would like to argue today is a responsibility that we have to some extent as teachers. Now, this means moving from the traditional mode where the teacher just inputs or sends out information to one which recognizes that our students are not just learners, they're users. And most importantly, they're explorers, and they're going to be exploring spaces that don't exist within the textbook. By recognizing this, we can move to a collaborative mode where the teacher still serves as an expert, and importantly, again, as someone who warns and cautions, okay, that form doesn't work here. Do not use that form to your teacher, right? Do not use that form when doing public speaking, but allows the students to move information among each other, serve as experts, learn from each other. And the benefit to us is that we're all getting older. We're all not as hip and cool and with it as we used to be. Gain information as well. What forms are the kids using? How do we access this? Well, our students can help us just as we help them navigate the appropriate place for these kinds of forms. So where are your students using the language that they're learning from you? That's a question that I'd like you to ask yourself. Do you know? Do you know what they're accessing with the language they're learning? Certainly, they're probably learning it to pass some tests, etc., to connect with their families. Yeah, absolutely. But what else are they doing with it? Do they use it online? Are they messaging friends with the language? Are they using it on Twitter, on YouTube, on TikTok? Are they watching Netflix in the language? What language are they encountering in these kinds of spaces? And is this language something that they need help navigating? Is there time or space in the classroom for students to talk about, share, or even work together to understand the language forms that they are coming across in these various spaces? So to give an example, and this is quite specific, but as part of my research, I catalog Japanese slang. And this term here, sweets with a laughing mark, is used online to mock people that are seen as following trends. It comes from a brief trend in the 80s where people would call everything, including Japanese candy, sweets, and people use that sweets term to mock those people, and it became a net slang thing. Now, you may be thinking, that's specific, that's kind of weird. Why would my students need that? Well, it appears in places you wouldn't expect. Indeed, this is used in a Netflix anime that came out a few years ago. It just popped up in the dialogue. Are your students watching shows on Netflix? Are they watching YouTubers? This stuff might occur. You don't know. And if they encounter this form saying, don't learn that, don't use that, that's wrong, that's slang, is actually preventing them from gaining the expertise to navigate. Oh, okay, I've encountered this form. Why is it being used in this specific context in this show, right? That kind of meta-linguistic knowledge, as we call it, or knowledge about language itself, is very, very useful to becoming a fluent language user, because fluent language users can, of course, look up the kind of words that they encounter that they were not necessarily familiar with. So how do we bring the informal into the formal? The classroom is supposedly this formal setting. Where do we find space? And I know time is always an issue, so do keep in mind, I'm not saying turn the entire class into a slang discussion, but is there a little bit of time for students to discuss terms they have encountered? And this is really great because it turns the students into the experts and means that, you don't have time to scour the internet. You don't have time to scour Netflix, to listen to the latest hip hop in the language that you're like, or the latest pop, whatever, and look for forms that aren't in the textbook or a bit odd. Students will bring it to the classroom. They're excited to, because this is the stuff that excites them. Can finding words be part of homework or exercises? If you're saying, here's a grammar point, can it be an exercise? Can you find this grammar point, out in the wild? For instance, if you're talking about verb conjugation, how do slang verbs conjugate? Investigate and report back. Can you make up your own verbs? Looking at what you've learned from seeing some of the slang verbs, could you make one up that's useful as someone learning the language in Australia? What kind of premises? What are the rules that are going into this construction of language that it follows? And what does that help us remember about how normal, quote unquote, verbs conjugate? And can we use media in classes listening activities, especially when there's possibility for discussions about the language forms, right? Here's a scene. Why is it being used in this scene? What do we learn from this? Like, what is the point of this context? So don't shy away from non-traditional sources of language use, of language data. Most streaming services have subtitles or even dubbing available and can be interesting for adding discussions. And students can bring and share this material that fits into a class. Again, like finding a grammar point in the wild. I'm not saying spend your evenings scouring Netflix until you find the right grammar point, but students would actually kind of enjoy doing that because it's something they might be doing anyway. If you find out your students are all active on Twitter in the language that you use, tell them to say, all right, look for some people using this grammar point in real life, and then let's bring it into class and discuss it. And this has a benefit for us too, because it keeps us to date, right? Which can be difficult to do in real life. The older we get, the less, the less the kids let us know what's going on. The more the language that we use or we thought was cool dies out, and the language that young people think is cool begins to appear. And this can keep us up to date in a way that is useful as well. Because one key factor in the motivation of language learning is finding value in using the language. And if we only teach the most formal of forms to 16-year-olds, to 17-year-olds, to 18-year-olds, how much are they going to use these forms? Hopefully a lot in the future, But what about right now? Certainly, again, when talking to your family, there's often a lot of cultures and languages where you want to use respectful terms. So that's very, very useful. But what happens when they leave those forms? What happens when they try to go to contexts where they have their friends? Speaking too formally in a casual setting can come off as kind of standoffish. I'm speaking in a way that's, trying to sound formal, trying to sound academic, like, oh, I know what I'm talking about, but I'm also trying to sound friendly and open in a way. If I was very, and in today's lecture, I will be discussing, it wouldn't be engaging. And we don't want our students only able to speak in a way that doesn't match the variety of contexts where they will enjoy learning what we're teaching them. So embrace the informal, or at least embrace working in chances to explore them, as this gives students a way to find and use spaces for what they're learning that can be safe and that they can receive the kind of warnings they'll need. This positions the learners as experts and let them realize that they can learn through use. Not only does what we teach them in the classroom help them pass a test, help them do their homework, it helps them access a space where they can have the skills and development to navigate it and to learn more, and even potentially, again, bring it back to the classroom and tell people something that they might enjoy. And this is still engagement with culture at the end of the day. We often think of culture as the traditional stuff, the old stuff. And that's, of course, very, very important. But the new stuff is culture as well, because the old stuff at one point in time was the new stuff, right? The old stuff was new. People latched onto it. It kept going. And now it is these traditional items. And the people making the new stuff. So again, in Japan, the people making things like Japanese hip hop, etc., grew up around the old Japanese culture, the traditional Japanese culture. And you can definitely find influences of that in there. So it's not saying, Leo, ignore the past, but what can the present excite us? To give an example, common in Japanese classrooms is, let's read and write haiku. Is this a good activity? Sure. Yeah, it's great. Haiku are really cool. They're really beautiful. It's a gorgeous art form. It's very interesting. But when you take a student who is just into beginning Japanese, there's a lot of missing context there, right? Here's an ancient form of poetry. Here's how you make it. Here's the history of it. Write it. The end. Are they going to go out and read haiku in Japanese? Probably not. They don't have the language ability. Are they suddenly haiku fans? Maybe, but probably not. What about something like, let's examine the grammar point we're discussing in the media you're interested in. Look at, say, Japanese music, Japanese media. Are students interested in this already? Yeah, a lot of students come to my classrooms very interested in Japanese media, contemporary media. Does this mean we throw away the traditional? No. But by saying, hey, the stuff that you're interested in is cool and of value, and that you can, learn forms from it, gets them excited about Japanese. And getting them excited about Japanese gets them excited about Japanese traditional culture, which gets them excited about haiku eventually. It sets the stage. It scaffolds them from, okay, here's the stuff you already like. Let's talk about that. That's Japan. Japan is interesting. The past is interesting too. Andrea has a great comment here about recent movies and looking at the up-to-date language in the movies. Absolutely, right? This is the stuff that connects with them immediately, and that opens the door. I got excited about Japanese culture through becoming excited about the Japanese language. And that involved seeing the ways that I could use it, right? Seeing the different forms. And that brings that appreciation. It's not throwing it away. It's not throwing it away for the modern. It's opening up doors that are already there even further, showing the value of that and the risks, and bringing that back to a way that makes everything, developing an interest in everything relating to Japan, rather than just this one specific event. Additionally, the traditional approach can have the problem is that they don't know when and how to use the forms that they encounter. We say, okay, here's how you use the language. That's it, the end of this discussion. Go out into the world with no background knowledge. And this can be a problem. I remember a teacher in Japanese not teaching me a form because it was quote unquote wrong. It is now incredibly common. And the first time I heard it though, I was very confused because I was like, I don't know what that means. I was told this wouldn't be used except outside of really, really underground circles. But here's a teacher using it in the classroom. Like, how do I encounter that? And then I recently encountered this issue as well. Again, Japanese example, I apologize. But there are different terms for my father, depending on who you're talking to. So when you're talking to your father, you normally call them Otoo-san, and you refer to them when talking to other people, though, as chichi. So Otoo-san is considered respectful. So if I said your father, I would use Otoo-san. And I respect my own father when talking to my father, but I use the humble term chichi when talking about my father to other people. I had a student come in and say, I saw a show where it was the opposite. And it was very confusing, and they were very, very confused. So we went and investigated, and it's this show here, Spy Family, which is quite popular at the moment. And there's a scene where the character in the top right here says, "Call me Otoo-sama," which is a bit formal. A father asking their kid to call them Otoo-sama is really, really formal. So he sounds a bit stuffy. And then she calls him chichi, which you use when talking about your father to other people, but not to your own father. So what's going on here? It's kind of a joke. It's funny. It's weird. The character is silly, and it helps us learn that this character is silly because they're using the forms wrong. So instead of saying, okay, that's wrong, don't use it, we actually brought this into the classroom and discussed it. And now the students understand what's going on. And because we showed them the wrong example and discussed it as a joke, as humor, they now know more about the right way to use things, right? By looking at an example that parodies real use, by looking at an example that pushes against the formal, we actually learn about the formal because we understand it better, right? This is a joke because it goes against what is in the textbook. And that's kind of the point of what's going on, leading to a place where slang, non-traditional sources, the comment in the chat about songs, great, lots of great stuff in songs and lots of references to the past, right? People like referencing traditional culture in songs, even modern songs. Great way to find those kind of things. Are places for both learning and awareness raising, moving to students that say, I know what the terms are and where to use, or even more importantly, not use them, right? I know not to call my father Chichi to their face because this show showed me that that's a kind of humorous joke that is only played up for parody. So I actually, I know we end at 8, so I don't really have time for the second breakout room. I apologize for budgeting a bit improperly. I want to do it one at a time for a bit of open-ended questions at the end. So I'm just going to wrap up here by talking about the value of play, because this ties together these two themes that I've been mentioning. Games, activities, and informal language use share benefits. In both cases, they're going to provide students with confidence, changing them from learners to users. And that's really, really key. We don't want students to be passive vessels. We want them to use language. How do they use language? In a game where most of the risk is gone, or outside of the classroom where they're engaging not with the communities we provide them with or the communities that we formally expect, like a test room, parents, grandparents, but the ones that they also want to engage with in their spare time. Engaging with online dictionaries, with humor, slang, etc., not only gives students the chances to explore language, it helps them learn the limits and the potential of these areas and tools. It's not just about having fun, but also learning what is good and what is good where, what is bad and what is bad where, and why, when we leave the curated space of our textbook, we find forms. Comment and chat about memes, absolutely. Obviously be careful with what the content of the memes, but if you have time and students that are skilled enough to break down memes, they will learn a lot about language. Yes, these areas and tools, right? How can students use language in their day-to-day to access things that they are immediately interested in, because that will feed back and develop their interest in language, which will develop their passion. And that includes their passion to just sit down and do the kind of rote memorization that is ultimately involved in any kind of language. All of these activities then work as a form of scaffolding and awareness raising, building levels of familiarity and confidence that don't occur through rote practice. No matter how many times you write a word down, no matter how many times you use a grammar point in a sentence, it doesn't build confidence to the same extent that using a word and seeing someone's eyes light up and go, yeah, I gotcha, I understand what you're saying does. There's no better feeling than putting a word out there, putting a sentence out there and being like, oh, I hope this sticks. And then have the person just go, yeah, okay. And then respond immediately. That is where the key motivation lies, right? In that kind of use. So by providing opportunities for this, providing games for it, providing places for it, letting them be experts, we can develop this sort of important motivation. So thank you very much for your time. We have about 10 minutes till 8. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have until then. If you want to put them in chat, if you raise your hand, I believe I can call on people and unmute, whichever works for you. But I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found it practical and useful and hopefully motivating as well. It's been an absolute delight and honor to be here. And I think it's great what you're all doing, and really, really hope that I know that you will, and I encourage you to keep on promoting and developing these community languages, because they're a vital part to language in Australia. Can games like Minecraft, I don't know, that might be a bit complicated in terms of setup, but if you can think of a way and your students already know how to use Minecraft, yes. If they don't already play Minecraft, explaining how the game works might take way too long. But encouraging them to change a game that they already play settings to the language can definitely be one. Hong, I see your hands up.
Yeah, my question was starting from the beginning of this lesson, because I always find gaming is the best way to for education. And I use Kahoot for all of the time during the lockdown. But when we're back to the offline class, we don't have the facility. Any way that it can overcome that stuff, like we need computer or iPad or thing like that to make the game, to create the game, and to let them play together.
Absolutely. Obviously, when we don't have access to the internet, the games we can make become more limited. But as I showed earlier, very, very, very simple games are very, very fun. So again, if you're using a game with numbers, bringing some dice to class is all you need. If you're using a grammar point, you want to have a make a sentence activity, some little cards, right, with the words that they need. I had a random shuffler, but you can just have cards that they shuffle together and draw. Even going into PowerPoint, making a piece of paper with the thing they need for the game. I am this person, these are my talents games I showed earlier. That's just a PowerPoint slide. You can print that off and just hold up the piece of paper or pass it around, right? And that's easy to go. So again, don't forget that simple is great. In fact, I'd say the simpler it is, the better. So you can easily have a game that just requires one A4, maybe A3, so you can pop it up or hold it so everyone can see it, piece of paper with the information they need to play the game, and they're ready to go.
Thank you.
We got a little bit of time left. Any other questions that anyone has?
Hi, Wes. It's Andrea from Deutschland here. With regards to the Minecraft, I've done that ages ago with a class, and I actually gave that as a homework because in the classroom it was a bit too cumbersome to do, but they loved it as a homework, and I had them describe different scenes and what they were building as a homework, and that was fabulous. And the kids were really enthusiastic suddenly about their homework. That was an easier way of getting them to do something that they don't normally like to do.
That's fantastic. So were they all Minecraft players?
They were all Minecraft. They were Minecraft mad at the time.
Okay.
And each of them they were all playing it, and they were discussing it when I was coming into the classroom at the time. And so eventually we got to actually do the lesson, but then I kind of said, how about we use Minecraft as your topic for today for the homework, and they got incorporated into what we were doing in grammar wise. It was really easy, and the kids absolutely loved it, and everyone actually for once did their homework. That
is fantastic and inspiring. That's incredible. I definitely think it's good that they all already knew how to play Minecraft. But if they're already there, yeah, that's great. I love to hear that something I would have never thought of using just a full actual published game, but great. That's wonderful to hear. Gizem, you have your hand up?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
My question was, can you suggest any academicians or scientists related to gamification? I'm also teaching English, and sometimes I feel a little bit hardship to gamify some concepts. So is there any person that I can just read their articles and get some more idea about gamifying?
So no disrespect to people that study gamification, but I would actually maybe not look at articles, because those can be very, very academic and very in theory, or they can oftentimes involve games that have been built with resources from grants that are fantastic, but require a huge amount of time and money to invest. Instead of looking at articles, I would just go and look at like online game suggestion sites, because some people out there are doing and even giving away really great stuff that's really, really simple and really straightforward, and doesn't, like, when you write a gamification article, it's going to be trying to engage with like theory and other articles and that kind of thing. And it might not actually have like practical breakdowns. And if it does, it might not have, the article might not come with like the materials for making the game, even if it does explain how the game works in good detail. So I would just go with, like, put us academics aside for a bit, and just see what, elementary school teachers, middle school teachers are doing online, because some of those people are not only extremely creative, but they've been doing games successfully for decades and are kind enough to share everything you need to just pop that right into your classroom. And also, of course, academic articles can be behind paywalls, like, university paywalls and stuff. And that's, again, we don't want you to spend a lot of money to buy an article only to find out that the article isn't just theoretical. It doesn't have like a step-by-step guide to the game, or, that the game is too difficult. So start simple. Just, Google fun classroom game and find somebody that really jives with the way you teach and what you think your students would enjoy would be my recommendation. Pinterest, Liv recommends in chat. That also, yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff on that side as well.
Okay, another question, like I generally use Kahoot, Google Jamboard and other things. Is there any other option that I can use for a digital way of gamifying things? Do you have any recommendation?
I keep things incredibly simple. So I just use PowerPoint slides again, or flashcards, like just multiple, like Quizlet. I'll make multiple sets of flashcards and say, one person open this one person open this one person open this one, and then they work together. Basically, the flashcard has their game piece. Those real simple websites can be very, very effective, and PowerPoint can be really good for a game where students just have to kind of look at the information like on the screen and go with it. Don't hesitate to, even you can make a game in Word, in Paint, and it'll be great. Yeah, but all the, those big ones are fantastic. But don't hesitate to use something really small and simple. Students like small and simple. Oh, we got time for maybe one more. Is there a last question?
A little bit quiet there.
All
it was
right.
very interesting, very interesting, Wes. Are there any more questions, anyone?
I was just going to say, sorry, it's me.
Yeah,
I don't want to. Yeah, hi, Ružica. I just want to say, yes, games are great. Sometimes I've found with students like young and older that there's a tendency to sometimes misunderstand the I guess purpose of the game. They kind of misconstrue the intent, because often if the language classroom is really fun, then they don't, I don't know whether it's just younger kids or certain kids, they don't think that's learning. They don't think that's serious. That's all. That's my only reservation with games, but I'm learning to navigate them in my classroom.
That's a great point, and I think I'm glad you raised that. One small, obviously it depends on the student, and if students are getting so hyped that they're not learning, that's also bad. Again, simple games that focus on the grammar point are helpful, but it's even okay to make time at the end of the class to say, hey, so through this game, we learned this grammar point, right? So you can, if you want to practice this grammar point, you can try this game at home, make it explicit, like what we've learned, right? Say that if you're using the game to connect to a speaking activity, a more traditional open one, you can even pause and say, okay, we use this game to practice this grammar point. Let's now use this grammar point more openly. And even just telling the students like, hey, you learned this through the activity that you did, right? Spelling it out for them if that is necessary. If they're just like, it was a game, it doesn't mean anything, then maybe games aren't the best for that classroom. But don't hesitate to tell them why we're playing a game. And it's not just to have fun. It's because it is a vital way of getting us to the point where we can just use the grammar point like it's comfortable, like it's second nature, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's mute now.
Okay, I think we can wrap up there. It's bang on 8 o'clock. So Wes, look, thank you. That was actually, not actually, it was really, really interesting. I was expecting you to be interesting. As I said before, we had a bit of a chat before, and it was a really interesting session. I'd just like to reiterate that everybody, you can find the recording on the YouTube channel, which is in the chat. Please feel free to contact me should you have any questions about that. In the meantime, we're going from games this week to, well, not just games, but and language, but we're going to technology next week. So using the same Zoom link, we will see you next week. You're very, very welcome. And Wes, thank you so much again. And have a great night, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Then let's turn West.